All right, looks like we're live. Back on for celebrating our NX version 17 release. It's actually pretty wild thinking about that we have already version 17 going out, but we're so accustomed to it. Like driving those numbers up, that is kind of crazy. So I just briefly wanted to show to everyone, and actually I'm going to share it in the chat. We have a blog post that summarizes it pretty nicely, and I'm going to quickly share my screen to show it to you all. And here we go. So we have a blog post that you can find on dev.to as well as on our blog at blog.narwhal.io. This is the NX 17 release blog post where Zach also created an overview video if you prefer the video version. And what we're going to do today is mostly going a bit through the main points here. There's actually much more in here that we're probably able to go through in the live stream today. But if you have specific questions or you have already given this blog post a look, definitely raise questions. We're going to try to pick them up as we go and kind of answer them and address each of them. Also, a reminder before we start, go help us start our repo. So if you go to narwhal/nx on GitHub, hit that star button. We want to get that up. We actually wanted to buy, or Jeff actually wanted to buy Zach a super nice Hulk Hogan suit, but we missed that deadline apparently. So, but it's still go. We're pretty close to 20K. So if you haven't started yet, go and hit that button. Cool. So to get started, there has been actually not even like a month has passed by that we had NX Conf. And for that as well on dev.to/nx, we have a whole blog post which basically summarizes the whole conference, pointing to the individual videos, which are now directly on our YouTube channel. We're actually going to release them over time in the next couple of weeks, but you can find all of them already embedded in here. So in case you missed NX Conf, definitely check that out. There's plenty of content in here, some of which we are actually going to address a bit also today, because it's kind of relevant for the version 17 release. So dev.to/nx is the way, basically, where you can find all that info. And talking about that, one of the main announcements at NXConf has been some new exciting feature on NX Cloud front. Today we also have like Ben and Alden here, which are co-members of the NX Cloud team and working hard on the next iteration of it. So Ben and Alden, who of you wants to go and kind of re-announce it on here if someone has missed it, like the next feature that we are going to release, which is going to be pretty exciting.
Are you talking about NX going into CI?
I guess so.
So yeah, I guess so. We released we announced NX Workflows, which is basically our take on CI, and that is CI heavily optimized and integrated, deeply integrated into your NX workspace. So for a small description, it's basically a shift between standard CI, which is a machine-based system, to a task-focused, task-oriented system, CI. So basically before or right now, you are kind of describing the machine and how many you want, and you assign tasks to run for each one of them. And with NX Workflow, you basically list the task that you want the CI to execute, your NX affected command, and the end. That's NX Workflows. They will directly allocate this task that you basically list that you want to execute to machines in the background and in a way that is optimized for speed. So think about distribution and unique, in a unique way to your workspace with historical data. So your CI is getting a lot faster, and you don't think about your machine anymore. You only focusing on tasks and what is executed by your CI. So this plays really well with DTE, which is the distributed task execution, and it actually enables DTE to be easier with workflows. And that's just the beginning. Workflows is the foundation for all the upcoming features for Nextcloud. So it opens a lot of possibilities and directions. Like we see which one we will go into, but for example, it would probably explore the continuous integration and continuous deployment. So stay tuned. So this is a huge announcement.
Yeah, 100%. Like maybe one thing I think it's kind of what we could kind of briefly dive a little bit deeper is the whole because you mentioned like machine-oriented CI systems, which is basically what we have right now, which is mostly you give it a set of instructions to like a VM basically, right? In terms of like some YAML-based language, and that's just a VM spinning up and running those commands, right? So what is the main difference? Because when we compare like machine-based and task-based, like why is it so like what is the difference and why is it actually relevant, let's say, for a monorepo or a bigger repository after all? Like what are the advantages there? Because that's I think like, one of the points that people kind of get confused about it, because it's kind of a different approach basically, right, to CI.
Yeah, I think one of the things that people find so cool about NX already is the amount of metadata that we have available to us. So we know how all of your projects work together, and how they relate to each other, and how your tasks depend on each other and things like that. And it works really well for local development, and it works pretty well for your CI development currently. But what we can do with NX Cloud Workflows is actually take that a step further. And so we can do cool things like scale up and down the number of agents that are required automatically for you. So that's not something you need to think about anymore. Do I need 5 agents? Do I need 10? Or do I need 2? Right? We can look at the tasks that need to be run, understand how they all relate to each other, and say, okay, maybe for this one you only need 2 agents, or for this you've affected all of your projects and now you need 15. And in addition to that, we'll have the ability to dynamically scale up and down as you're running things. So if you have a task graph that maybe has very few leaf nodes but lots of projects in the middle, it's reasonable to think of a situation where we could start with only a single agent but then spin up 8 more and take those down. And so there's a lot more kind of tightly coupled integration potential that we have between NX and your historic kind of CI setup that's really cool for us.
And that's also a bit like the difference, I think, like to the current DT system, right? Which goes in that direction, but you still have to manually configure like the amount of agents, which potentially might change depending on the task you run, which you said, right?
Yep, exactly.
Cool. How does it compare? Like, does the NX Cloud Workflow system, the new basically approach to CI, still run on existing providers? Is it a completely self-hosted system? Like, is it being hosted by us basically?
Yeah, so this is something that we're really trying to make the experience good. So we understand that it will be a bit of a difficult sell for some people to trade off their whole CI system completely. You might have other teams in your organization, things like that. So we're happy to say that NX Cloud Workflows is compatible with any other CI system that you might be using. So if you use Jenkins, or you use GitHub Actions, or you use Circle CI, you can start all of your jobs with that, but then actually offload the work to NX Cloud Workflows hosted agents, and we can still give you all of the benefits of scaling up and down your agent pools and things like that that you would if you used us as an all-in-one, kind of like complete workflow solution. So you can incrementally adopt it, or you can use it outright.
Cool. And I think that also comes with some UI improvements, right? So I'm looking here, for instance, at what we have currently on staging. So this is like, we're basically dog fooding this system right now on our own NX workspace, like on our NX GitHub repo. So if you're curious about like what the current configuration looks like, you can have a look. Obviously, it's subject to be changed. So this is still like super experimental. And we're kind of testing it out on our own setup, right? This is one of the overview pages, right? Like where you see the different kind of pipeline executions. Anything particular you want to dive into here?
Yeah, so what you see at the top is your common runs that are done by NX. So nothing really new here. But what's new is right at the bottom. Those are the setup steps for the agents. So the agents are the machines that basically do the work for you. And you can see here the number of pills corresponding to the number of agents. and you can see that you have access to the logs, information of each agent, so you can actually debug what's if something is wrong, or if you want to have more information. But basically, you will be able to customize your agents that are running your code. So you will be able to say, okay, so I want a special Git checkout for every agent. I want and we have a templating system for that, so you will be able to reuse create small templates and reuse them into your workflows. And basically, you can see all our installation for running the CI on the NX repo here. So we are restoring the cache, we are installing PNPM, Cypress, Rust, doing all those kind of stuff to be sure that all agents are in a good state to perform and execute all the tasks that are needed. And they will be able to share the cache. They will be able to NX will be distributing all the tasks to those agents, and they will be able to communicate between them to offload the tasks, share the cache and everything. So it's all the magic.
I remember, like, because basically the blog post that I mentioned earlier, there's actually one entry by Simon, which is heavily working on the whole like setup of NX Cloud workflows. And he presented that at NXConf, and you find a link here. And I was most excited also about all those approaches where we can reuse caching among those different steps, right? So you can, like, as he mentioned, there's right now in the architecture is actually a shared workspace volume across these different machines potentially and those different steps. And so we can actually do some quite smart things to actually restore some of those things, right? Like restore artifacts that are being passed between those steps in a much smarter way. So, which is commonly a problem, especially like also in monorepos, where you constantly need to kind of get like those artifacts restored, especially node modules and stuff. If you want to dive a bit deeper, so right now we're just basically kind of going over it a bit. Like if you want to dive deeper, definitely check out that talk from Simon. There's a small summary here in our blog post. We also started updating our NX Cloud docs. So we're rolling those out incrementally. So what you see now is a new intro page that we added in, and we're currently repurposing and re-elaborating some of our existing recipes that currently still work with DT, right? And so as we keep kind of rolling out NX Cloud workflows over the next couple months, like we will update these much more and like have much more integrated guides into not just DT, but then on top also have the NX Cloud workflow set up. Cool. Anything to add to that, Ben, Alden?
Nope, just be on the lookout for more news from us regarding NX Cloud workflows starting in Q1 next year. And we'll be doing kind of a slow rollout to people, and we'll have some more information for you soon.
We're also very excited about that feature. So this is this is really something that we are looking forward to release.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, like it makes sense as a natural evolution of our DT setup. Like because CI is a common issue when you start having bigger repos, especially in large enterprises. Cool. So next thing I have on my list here is we quickly put together a list of things to go through so we don't miss anything because the release was quite packed. One thing that is more at the core of NX, so over the last couple of releases, maybe even over the last year almost or so, like we started moving some performance related things to Rust. And we also have John here today, which kind of has been leading a lot of that development. So in general, John, like, can you maybe kind of elaborate, like, why did we go in that direction? What type of things are we starting to move over? What is already written in Rust? And
for sure. It all started with hashing, essentially. And hashing is one of the most important things in NX because we need to know if we need to rerun something and all that fun stuff. And originally we had hashing done in Node, and we used the Node libraries that were provided in there. But that library itself was slower, and we looked into actually using Rust libraries to actually get that hash and use it. And just based on that, it increased maybe like the speed by two times on all that. just by hashing. And with that, we decided to keep going and say, well, what else can we do that was more performance oriented in NX? And it goes from basically from the hashes all the way down to creating the project graph. And that's all the core in NX. Just recently with NX 17, we have something new for task hashing where we build the plans for those hashes in Rust. And we're now able to show those plans and those plans being those inputs that we specify in the tasks and the targets in your project.json. And based on those plans, we will be able to hash quicker and more efficiently. And that hash based on that plans is going to be coming out in 17.1, where I'm working on now. But going back to the plans itself, it's very helpful when you're debugging something and you want to know what's actually affecting your cache or your
You're
cache
talking about
hits.
these ones, John, right?
Yes,
Just to
exactly.
kind of quickly interrupt. So this is basically the graph here. I'm here in VS Code and I use NX Console.
Yep.
And so if you kind of open up the graph for that, and I select here, I just have 2 apps in this repo here, and I open up the graph for the builds.
Yep.
You now basically have a new entry here, which is called inputs.
Yep.
And that basically shows you all the files that are kind of involved in this kind of operation, this specific task of building, even
exactly.
the dependencies, right? So you can even here see my dependent lib.a, and you can expand that and go deeper. And these come, like for those wondering, these come out, like when we talk about inputs, these are basically the inputs we specify here.
Yep.
And usually they are built up of a series of named inputs, right? So a series of globs. And so this debugging functionality is quite useful actually to actually see, hey, do my globs actually work in the way I expect, and are the files included I would expect, right?
Exactly. Are the files that I want affecting this cache essentially?
Yeah.
And so right now we have that plan being built in Rust, and it's being used for the graph here. And like I was saying, it's going to be used for, I guess, the next generation task hasher that we're going to have. And just for like preliminary numbers of that, like on the NX repo, hashing goes down from, let's say, 90 milliseconds to 7 milliseconds just for hashing on the NX repo. And it's a pretty big improvement, and it's going to speed up the time that NX will run on CI, because usually we would have the daemon running locally. On CI, the daemon doesn't start, so having NX run quick without the daemon, especially on CI, is very helpful for a lot of folks, so that NX would kind of get out of your way and make sure that your builds and your lints and your tests are running as quickly as possible. And that's pretty much the goal. So we want to make core NX as lean as possible and get out of your way, essentially. Right.
Cool. All about performance and diving deeper into that stuff. Like every millisecond counts.
Every millisecond counts. Yeah, we're going down to microseconds soon.
I mean, this is the beginning, right? Because right now we generate the same plan that we use to hash in Node, and we're going to hash everything that we use to hash. But there's things that we can do to refine the plan before we actually do the heavy work of actually reading the files and hashing them and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
So it will get even faster with this kind of like new architecture of hashing tasks.
Yeah, it's very exciting. And eventually I'm going to write a whole series of blog posts on all the different things that we discovered while moving to Rust. There's a lot of things that could be helpful for a lot of people, especially with a lot of heavy objects moving between Rust and Node. So I'm excited to write that out. Hopefully next year.
I will remind you about it.
Yes, please.
Noted. Right. Cool. So one of the next things I have on my list is maybe in terms of feature, not as big, but especially for people that have already been using like NX and being accustomed to run generators, we've made some changes, and I think Jason was involved into that, basically into adjusting our generator paths and how we would resolve those paths when you generate new things.
Yeah, so I can show my screen and show. So I have a React repo that I just set up. It's a standalone repo. Last time we were here, we talked about how we generate libs. So instead of just generating a lib like we normally do, you can now kind of like put it into whatever directory you want, right? So if I make a shared directory here in the root of my repo, and if I cd into there, I can run nxg lib header. Of course, I can't type once I'm sharing my screen, right? But this is going to generate it inside of the directory that I've picked. I'll go through that a little bit slower. So these are normal prompts, just asking like which generator I want to use. But this is the important prompt where it'll kind of prompt, do you want the as provided version? So I'm in this directory of shared and I want to generate a header, and it just takes that and just like gives me exactly what I want. Before, the way that we were doing it is if you just type this in whatever directory in the repo, we would always consider it from the workspace root, and we would always kind of derive things for you. So it became hard to do things like, I want this in a directory called, I don't know, like special header, but the name of the library should just be header. Well, this is now going to show us even like more interesting options where the name here is just header, a very basic name, but then it'll end up in a different directory called shared special header. So let me go ahead and keep it simple. I'm going to generate a lib called header. And so we kind of showed this last time. So this is just a little refresher. What we've done now is to kind of extend this into other things that you generate. And I'll move over to doing this with kind of console as well. So if I just want to create a new component in here, the header, let's say like I want a profile icon, I can now just right click generate and say I want a React component. And so you'll get this new kind of warning that says we've changed how we've done this. So just kind of make sure that whenever you type in here, you take a look at the outputs that it's going to produce. So if I wanted a profile icon, right? This is now going to show up exactly where I clicked. So if you remember, I clicked into the source lib. Well, this is going to do the same thing, right? So if I actually go ahead and run this, it'll end up there. So it'll get a lot easier for you to kind of create components wherever you want. It doesn't have to be like relative to the lib. If you wanted to create a directory out here, it's a lot more flexible for you. If you're using console, like just it'll work for you out of the box. If you're using the CLI, we have the derived flag in there, mostly so that we can catch you when you're kind of going through old habits and kind of not just fail right away because you're not used to the new methodology.
So that will go away at some point, basically, once people are more accustomed to that, right? I mean, for new ones that start with an X now, it wouldn't be like they wouldn't know the difference, right? So it's basically just less magic, which at some point the magic got in our way of doing some more customized things.
Yeah. And yeah, that's about it for now. That is one of the changes that you'll probably see in your workspaces, no matter like which framework you use, including a new framework that we've added to the mix,
which we're going to talk about soon. And someone brought up like
in JetBrains.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, now that we also develop like directly the plugin, like our team is also in charge of that plugin, so we are trying to make it as in sync as possible. Cool, awesome. Actually, let's. I had something else on my list, but let's pull forward another topic which now has come up a couple times, and someone also on the chat, I think, mentioned it here, like talking about Vue and Nuxt, and maybe someone can also like immediately dive into the question about the SWC support for NX Nest. Is anyone aware of that? I don't think at the moment, right? Like what we do, like Nest honestly hasn't received as much love as it would deserve in recent months. But we have like a whole undertaking going on that we're going to look deeper into the whole node like experience while working with NX. Like you could do that already for like almost like since ever NX has been around. So a lot of people, actually a lot of companies use Node on their backend and connect it to a front end because it just makes a lot of sense for then integrating it into their more traditional maybe Java, .NET backends. But you're going to definitely see a lot of improvements on the Node ecosystem, which because we're going to focus a lot more on that as well. But talking about the sub question of that, the introduction of a new plugin, Vue, which has been asked for a super long time, and it kind of closed the circle of having all the major front-end frameworks now covered first class in NX. Katrina and Jack worked on that, so maybe you want to dive in and kind of explain with what it is about, what support we have right now, and the story around it.
Sure.
I just want to say, like, Katarina did 90% of the work. I did a little bit and helped test, but it's mostly Katarina.
Yeah, Katrina started with the Vite stuff and kind of remained there, right? Like in a whole kind of, well, Vite is kind of general purpose, right? But it kind of drags you in, I feel, into the Vue ecosystems. Once we started with Vite, it kind of was a natural evolution.
It actually worked out really well. Sorry, don't mean to like sidetrack the conversation, but because our Vite plugin was done, I think pretty well, the Vue integration wasn't that crazy. It was like fairly simple.
Nice.
Yeah, when you just have to create generators, everything is just simple, right? Even though Jack found all the bugs I created and closed them, so yeah. I don't know. Should I share my screen and show? Okay. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So first of all, now if you go and do npx create NX workspace latest, you are I don't know if this is too small. I think it's too small, right? But I cannot make it bigger with warp. Okay, let me open terminal. Wait. I think terminal you can make it as big as you want, but not warp.
I thought you can command plus in warp.
You can, but I think it goes up to a certain size.
Oh, okay.
Never mind. I think this is big enough. Wait. Yes. So, okay. So if you go npx create NX workspace latest, my workspace, sorry, I don't know what, you're going to be prompted, you can see this, right? To create a Vue application now. Sorry. Everything after that will be less clunkier, I don't know the word. So you can choose either integrate monorepo, which is the usual integrate monorepo, or just a standalone Vue application. And
standalone would be, sorry to interrupt, like standalone would be just to create a single Vue app without any monorepo at all, right? Just like an NX tooling, but a single project, right?
Yeah, exactly. And you can add an E2E test runner like Cypress or Playwright or none. And you can choose a style sheet format and, you know, add NX Cloud. And this would create your workspace. So now I have the workspace ready, of course. And inside your workspace, you can, of course, do you can, of course, again, let's go to the NX console because it's better like this. You can generate an application, a component, a library, set up Tailwind, and of course add storybook support, right? Create storybook configuration and generate stories. So let's see what these generated things look like. So if you generate a Vue application, it's going to look exactly like a Vue. Not exactly, but it's going to look like the Vue application you get when you create a Vue application, right? So you have your main TS, you have your index HTML, and you have your app .vue component, and just the NX welcome component, but also you get the project JSON, and you have your build target here. And of course, we build your Vue application using Vite. And we also configure a test target, which uses Vitest. But if you're generating a library, or I think also an application, you can also choose to use Jest. So let's see. So again, if you do, of course, NX serve my Vue app, it's going to serve your Vue application, and it's going to look like this. But notice up here that it says also welcome my button, because I am importing this Vue library that I created, which has a component named my button. So again, I can have a Vue library, as I explained, which we build with Vita Builder, we test with vtest, and we export here the Vue components that we created inside the library. Your Vue library does not have to be a component library; it can also be like a utils library. And also, apart from these things, you can also generate Vue configuration. Vue Storybook configuration, sorry, and it will set up Storybook with the Vue 3 Vite framework. And it will also generate stories for you in the, so again, if you have props, it will read these props from your component, and it will create the necessary arguments for these props. And again, it will add the interaction tests that that our Storybook configuration generator does. So yeah, that's mostly it for the Vue generators. Again, sorry.
To backtrack a little bit, like the whole thing, like, because here we have just a single project, right? So the whole purpose of creating a library into it, that's something we commonly recommend as a way to extract some atomic behavior, some atomic like functionality of your application into its separate piece. And here, like, you show a good example where you could say, like, hey, I have a big application. I don't really have a monorepo, but that application is made up of like a series of components which are used throughout the application features. And so in this case, friends, you can extract that, have like Storybook on just that, and it almost becomes like a UI design library component at that point, like a UI design library. And so you can isolate that functionality. You could deploy that separately, right? So that kind of feature are actually pretty neat at that point.
Exactly. Yeah, so exactly as you said, you would add Storybook in your UI library, for example, and there wouldn't be a need to add it to your app. Your app would be the shell, and yeah, you can just import and yeah, I wanted to show you the Vita config. That's, of course, we use the Vue plugin, but we also use the Vita TS paths that takes care of resolving the TypeScript paths, so that you're able to import this button here from the library.
I think one other small thing is that the .vue file has, we handle them in the project graph as well, which was a major effort, right, Jason? It was, anyway, it actually correctly imports and stuff.
I did want to share this story. So like, we like just rewrote our TypeScript processor in Rust, like I think 2 months ago. And I was like, great, I'm like in this zone of parsing files and like writing a lexical parser. Just give me like 6 more weeks and I'll write one for Vue as well, right? And then I was like, like what if I just kind of shove the Vue files into the same parser that we have now? And so because we moved it to like a scanner kind of based system or a lexical parser kind of based system instead of finding the whole AST, like we don't actually need to know that a lot of this file isn't even TypeScript. It'll just kind of skip the parts that were irrelevant, find the TypeScript parts, and get the same information that we needed from it. So it literally became a 2-day effort of me just saying like, yeah, and now Vue files also go into there. Nice. So everything's kind of coming together, like the whole like writing things again, not just like in Rust. I mean, like nothing in Rust, at least for this, made it possible. It made it fast, but also just the act of us taking a look at our code and kind of like throwing it out the window and then rewriting it and like again allowed us to kind of do things in a better way and easily input Vue, because that was like the major reason why we dragged our feet on Vue, is because they don't write TypeScript files. It was like, they're kind of weird, but now it's like we see they do write TypeScript. It's just in a single file component, right? And that's totally fine for us now. So there are other frameworks out there that also use single file components, like Svelte or Astro, and you can probably expect support for our graph plugin to naturally do that as well. Coming soon. We're going to see how it works for Vue, but then we will, if it works well, we will expand it to Svelte and Astro and stuff like that.
So I guess two things. Like one, if you are using Vue and you're using NX, like try it out, let us know how well it works and stuff. And then second, I think someone asked about Nuxt. So
Yeah, I was about to bring it up. Yeah. Share the
so
story.
it's like Katarina is actually like this close to getting it done. So
Yeah.
there you go.
If you look through our PRs, you're going to see some Nuxt PRs in there.
Yeah, and to be clear, like when we say, because that's also something I want to highlight, right? Because when we say adding support for like Vue or Nuxt or all these frameworks, that usually means support in the sense of there is a plugin that you can install, but optionally, right? You can install it, and that will give you just additional benefits in the sense of like initial project scaffolding, generators, the whole thing what Katarina showed in terms of like you can easily set up Tailwind, Storybook, all these type of things, or end-to-end testing. So that's the added benefit if you want. But if you look, for instance, on our NX docs, right in the intro page, and you can also find here in the examples, basically in the sidebar. But there's like, we have a section added a couple months ago which says like pick your stack. And there was already Vue in it. Now it points to our official support, but there's also Nuxt in it, right? For which we don't have support released right now, but that is basically Nuxt just added to an NX repo, and NX will just pick up your package JSON scripts that Nuxt exposes and generates via their CLI. So that to say basically you can use NX even now with most of the technologies out there, but you won't get that like scaffolding and generators and that type of approach or automated migrations, right? So that's the added benefit that we add on top, but you don't have to actually. I myself use Astro, for instance, in an NX workspace, but I don't use any Astro NX plugin. I could, but like you don't have to, right? And because that's also something that often comes up.
Yeah, and
it's-
quick shout out to, I think Katarina is going to say the same thing. So go ahead.
Maybe. I wanted to say that. So especially for Nuxt, I spent like a whole meeting with Daniel Rowe going through how the layout of the application should be. Like we sat together and Daniel said suggestions like you should use this directory here and this directory there, and you should generate this and that. So it's like from the person who's responsible for Nuxt, he sort of
100%.
said, yeah.
Okay, we're not going to say the same thing. So
okay,
it's like shout out to the NX EXT X. I don't know how you say it, but NX extension team who like we say we adding the plugin and support. Like it was already kind of there. Like there were two existing community plugins, and they have like pretty decent usage. So I would say like great job maintaining those over the years and months. I don't know how long they've been in existence, but like yeah. So now we will take the torch and we will run with it. But like thanks to anyone.
It almost feels like we follow their path. We like this Dominic is part of that team, and like they had the Vite support, and at some point we decided, we should have Vite natively. So we started talking to them and kind of create our own. Now they started working on the Vue plugin. Like we should maybe have like native Vue one. So but they're super helpful. Like big kudos to them to collaborate with us and help us basically go through the initial phase and stuff. There was an earlier question which I wanted to bring back in, which is not Vue related, but it's actually NX Cloud related. Pawan here asked, like, is there any on-prem open source NX Cloud for enterprise without buying? I don't think so, right? Like we have the open source license, which is kind of free that we generously give to all open source projects that are on GitHub. You have the on-prem for the enterprise tier, if I'm not wrong, right? But I don't think there's any on-prem open source combination. But correct me, Ben or Alton, if I'm wrong there.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah.
Nothing. It's NX Cloud is closed source.
Yeah. Also because like I think the on-prem is mostly interesting or very interesting for large enterprise, which have like special security concerns and whatnot, that they cannot host any data at all in the cloud, in whatever cloud they want to use. And it's also obviously a bigger undertaking in a sense, like for us in terms of installing and support. Cool. Let's move on to the next point, which I wanted to address before, which is module federation. And this is specifically big in larger enterprises. Like a lot of our clients dive deep into mod federation, whether that is just for speeding up their builds and stuff, to actually building full-blown microservice, micro front-end infrastructures. And now we had support, I think, like already for over a year now, right? Like our initial approach was mostly, or even 2 years. Yeah, time flies. Like our initial support, I think, was mostly targeted towards building up your speeds, because mod federation allows you to not only like have your basically like what we call horizontal slicing, right? To build, like, have buildable application, buildable libraries, and then cache that, but actually also slice your actual application into smaller pieces where each of them can exist as an individual remote that is then assembled back into an application, but deployed at the same time. So that was one of the stories that we pushed forward quite a lot, and has quite some benefits, especially because you can cache, right? So in the end, like it's caching is a big effort. But Column and Nicholas have been working on quite some big improvements on the mod federation front. We've also been collaborating with some companies on it. So, well, I'll let you talk, Column and Nicholas, because you know all the details. So,
yeah, sure. So one of the big things that we focused on this iteration of the module federation cycle was TypeScript support and better TypeScript support. So I'm sharing my screen if you want to present that. Yep. We can see now that when we generate a host application, it generates by default with a TypeScript configuration file. And what that means is we'll get auto completion and better typing support if WebStorm indexes everything.
WebStorm.
I think it's slower when you're presenting. So
yeah, absolutely.
There we go. So we can see that we get auto completion and errors if we've not set it up correctly. Some information about how it should be set up. So that can just help you when you're building out your configuration, which becomes more important when you're dealing with independent deployability, which Nicholas will talk about, especially when it comes to managing library versions and things like that. Another feature that we added was type safe remotes, which means that when you actually use your remote through dynamic import, we can like get some auto completion on what the module itself is. And again, it's shown paused. There we go. We can see that we can get some support there. And if we try to follow through the reference, remember the command for this, it takes us through to the actual file within our workspace. Whereas before that wouldn't have existed. It wouldn't have been able to create that reference for us. We introduced a new generator called the Federate module generator. And to help demonstrate that, I'm going to create a JavaScript library called isEven. We'll use the new generator, consistent generator paths to help place it in the right position. And this library that was generated is very simple. It just will print out a function called isEven that will just return a string isEven. But if we wanted to federate this function so that it can be used by a host from a remote rather than as bundled as part of the application itself, then we can run the federate module generator. Call it the module isEven. We need to define a path to the file that we want to federate. And we want to specify the remote application that will federate it. So in this case, we use remote 1. What this does is it updates our module federation config for remote 1, and it will also update our tsconfig base to include the TypeScript path. We can see that our module federation config for the remote will have updated to add a new exposes for isEven, which means that in our host application, if we were to use this in our component somewhere, we can just try isEven. WebStorm catches up again. Yeah, my web server's been very slow. But yeah, we can see that function and its signature is all provided for us now with the type safe remotes. Yeah, so that's some of the type safety and the federate module generator that we added for this cycle. I'll pass it over now to Nicholas. He's going to talk about managing library versions and independent deployability.
Yeah, sure. I'm going to present. Oh no. Mac.
I think we can see it.
Oh, you can? Can you?
We see
Yep.
this browser window.
Okay, okay, cool. Okay. Oh, let me start here. So with NX 17, we've added the capability of versioning your libraries, and pretty much what that really means is I have a React app here which has three remotes and one host, which is called Shell, and we've listed all the remotes here, and it also has a library called UI that pretty much just has just the name and the version, and what this really means in terms of versioning your libraries is that similar to how you would share like React or Angular, and they have their versions inside of built inside the package, adding version support to your module federation libraries really helps in terms of if you have two different teams and you're deploying on, let's say, for instance, different cadences, and you deploy one. Let's say it's about, and I have an example here.
I think are you sharing the right?
Oh,
we just see the browser window.
Oh,
yeah, I think you need to share the full
maybe
screen, like a window.
Yeah.
Wait a sec. I think maybe it's blocking. Oh, so you're still seeing the GitHub page then?
We saw
yeah, we're
the
seeing
web
the
window.
browser window.
But
yeah,
I think we could imagine the code.
Jason has good imagination.
I have okay imagination when it comes to code. But someone asked in the chat if all of the stuff that we're talking about for module federation also applies to React.
Yes. That's what Nicholas is showing, and the stuff that Colin showed earlier is the same on React. But the plugins are same API, just like underneath it's a little bit different. But like what Nicholas is showing, basically, if you want to share your screen, it's fine too. But to talk through it, we added the ability to add a package JSON for your workspace library. Whether it's buildable or not doesn't matter. But like the version you specify in there is a version that will be built into your bundle. And what that means is if you have a library that's not a singleton, so it's not like it can be used per app, then basically you can deploy your app with a new version of the UI library, right? And if the other remotes are using a different version, it's fine because there's no conflict. There are some gotchas here, like if you have a shared singleton library, so for example, Redux and other things that are stateful, even React itself, you can't load more than one copy or else you get into trouble. Then it's up to you to figure out a process that works for your teams to block those or like somehow mitigate those problems, because like once you deploy one app and it has a new version of React, now when you navigate to other remotes, they can load the wrong version of React that they didn't support, and all of a sudden like things either break outright or things may not work super well. So we are.
That's a bit of cost, right, of independent deployability and versioning.
And I think that's why in the past we said don't do it, but I think it wasn't correct for us to just not address it. So we're looking at ways to help teams work with it.
Yeah, I think the nice thing now is like you have all those different, which I personally like, you have these different levels, right? Where you can say, hey, I start just with an old NX monorepo. I maybe even have a couple of apps in there. Then you can add like the modification on top, but it's just like still deploy as a whole, but just add it into kind of, as we mentioned before, like maybe improve the speed via caching. And then at one point you're like, okay, now we're ready, kind of like we actually want and need independent deployability. While you kind of probably are aware of the additional cost you have, but you still can leverage a lot of these things, right? But because you're still in the monorepo, but have type safety that we have seen.
This is
so
the
you
first
get
version
additional
of
benefits
this,
there.
right? So
yeah,
we're making more enhancements. If you are using Module Federation, whether it's React or Angular, whether you use Vite, which we don't support, like talk to us, like tell us what your problems are, and we'll try to figure out a way to unblock you.
100%. Yeah, and definitely keep an eye on our content channels. Like we are already thinking about some of the content. Like there will actually come a lot of the content around Module Federation. As I said, like or how you add those different layers to it and how you come from a single monorepo, like maybe even a standalone app, to a full-blown independent deployable monorepo based on Module Federation, both for Angular and React. So definitely keep an eye on that.
Okay, cool. I mean,
Cool.
that kind of sums it up, to be honest, in terms of this.
Yep.
Somehow I don't know why this sharing is not working. It's kind of sharing just one tab, but things like what Jack kind of said kind of sums up how Module Federation versioning of our workspace libraries kind of work. And really and truly, this is the only thing you need to add. That each of your remotes should not kind of share. So you want to expand that shared function inside of your module configuration config, and just say, okay, for this package, I don't want to share it. And what that means is when the host and remotes load in, the Webpack registry will check if the config for that remote, and if it's not shared, then it will just load the one that it's bundled with. And that's pretty much it. Similar.
And these are all documented too. So like read our docs, there are pages on this.
Yep.
Yeah, totally. I also just dropped the link to the example repo you're showing here. So if someone wants to dive into that repo and check that out.
Yeah, just as a call out too, I think one thing that example repo shows quite well is creating a common config that you can use across all your Module Federation configs. If you have a lot of remote applications, then you don't want to share certain libraries across all of them, then like just that example alone shows you how you could have that one file at the root of your repo and have all the remote applications use it, and it's really beneficial. And so I kind of want to go back to that question that brought up, the support between Angular and React. There is one slight difference, and it's that Angular has a difference in support for dynamic federation that React doesn't yet have, that we're hopefully going to be addressing soon. And that would be support by using manifest.json files that you could maybe download from an S3 bucket at startup and things like that.
Oh, there is also one thing that I don't think is also covered in the in our I guess our whole plan, that the support for promise-based remotes is also there. So if you don't want to load your remote statically, you can provide like a promise new promise kind of syntax to how you want to load your remote, and that should also work.
Nice. Cool. Yeah, as mentioned, like definitely keep an eye on our channels, because there's more content coming around related to Module Federation. And one of the last few points, actually we would have like quite a lot more, but one of the points that we want to definitely dive in, and there was actually a related question that kind of touches a bit on that, which is like some config improvements, some config simplification actually, which we did in NX recently. And so Gregory and Jason worked on that. So maybe Gregory, or Jason, you want to talk a bit about it and what exactly we did there.
Go for it, Gregory.
Yeah, sure. So NXConf has shown off the new Create Nodes API. And we're looking at utilizing that within our own plugins to be able to infer some targets based on the presence of configuration files in your repository, rather than having to lean on configuration that you have wrote that's bespoke and special for NX. So that's really about lowering the boundary of what's required to start adopting our plugins.
One other thing, though, is something that we already launched, right? Which is our NX.json changes.
Yes.
So
yeah,
forget about what you just heard, but you're gonna hear it again in like 2 minutes. let's go over the NX.json ones first. So for version 17, we made NX.json simpler. And one of the things that we didn't really like, was introduced quite a while ago, is that we had task runner options. And it was like, it's quite genius at the time. We were able to like create a different task runner for NX Cloud and all this stuff. But it gave like users a lot of config that I think like 80% of people never changed. Right. So we've removed the
And you
need
always
for
had
that.
to look it up if you wanted to change it, at least myself.
Yeah. It also has a kind of awkward name, but it's not necessary anymore. You can still have it. It's not like fully removed, but you don't need it, right? So if you create a brand new repo and you don't have anything here, then it will use the default task runner, right? The same thing that was before. A lot of the options that we had in here, like this is almost the right shape. We don't even remember
Almost,
the
yeah.
shape half the time.
I said, like, I never remember the shape. So
I don't
I'm
blame
happy it's
you,
removed.
but yeah, I just want to go through the difference between kind of like what you get if you don't have it and what you do if you have like the NX access token configured first. So if you don't have it, then by default, it's going to use the default NX runner. It doesn't use NX Cloud and like none of that. If you just add the NX Cloud access token property into your NX.json, it will automatically switch over to using the NX Cloud runner. And you don't need to install the NX Cloud package to do this anymore. So this is something that the NX Cloud team put together where we deploy the latest version of our client to the to the nx.app domain. And so what this means is that NX is going to be able to pick up that latest bundle, and you will always be on the latest version of NX Cloud that works with the NX Cloud that we have deployed. This kind of disconnects our API from the client, and we're going to be able to iterate on NX Cloud even faster, right? And you don't need to install another package, which everyone already knows, like you have thousands of packages you don't need anymore, right?
Yeah.
So that's
You actually just ran the command, like it's just NX connect, and that would automatically connect to you. And then obviously you can claim the workspace and etc. But if you look at the Git diffs, all you get is basically now an NX Cloud Access Token property, and that's it, right? There's nothing else that's being added.
Yeah, and a lot of the different options that you used to be able to provide in the task runner options have also been moved. So some of them are simple, like you used to be able to put a URL for your NX Cloud instance. You can still do that. It's moved up to the top level as like NX Cloud URL. I'm pretty sure. If I'm wrong, check our docs. The other thing is the cacheable operations. So Yuri was trying to type it out before. We nested cacheable operations within the task runner options. So you would have to like maintain this list in kind of like multiple task runners, or it would just be kind of like buried in there. Now we've moved it to defining it on the target. So you're able to define whether each and every target can be cacheable or not. So you see in the target defaults, we're saying like all build tasks should be cacheable by default.
Yep.
And this is the recommended way to do it, because like when you run things with distributed task execution, everything must be cacheable, at least for now. Stay tuned for what will come next for that. We have a lot planned, but like specified in here, and then all build tasks will be cacheable, and it's like alongside your build target, and it's harder to miss.
Yeah, and it's an opt-in, right? So you need to enable it. Like you need to go in and say cache true, and then it will be enabled, right?
For other task runners, like you will be able to configure it the same way, and we also kind of massage all of these into the existing task runner options. So this has actually no breaking changes for community task runners or anything like that. We have technically 0 minutes left, but I want to take
we can go a bit
more
over,
minute.
no problem. Yep.
Okay, I want to take 1 more minute out of your time to talk about something that we will be working on. So last time we were here, we kind of teased that we're working on Vue. Some of you noticed it already. For the next few months, we're going to be working on slimming down your configuration. And okay, this is kind of risky, but I'll just share my screen because it kind of does this.
Wow, I didn't expect a demo.
I didn't expect a demo either, but we're just We're just gonna do it.
We're gonna judge you
no.
for what we see on your screen.
Probably go ahead and judge me, right? So this is the Cypress Real World app. This is not really written by us. There's a bunch of debugging here. Let's just forget about what you just saw. Historically, like we've been pretty light-handed on adding NX in. So you'll get the NX JSON. You won't have this. I'll tell you what that is in a little bit. But then we'll just turn like package JSON scripts into NX targets. What we'll be working on is to give you more of the like normal executors that you'll get if you start an NX workspace from scratch. We're going to start introducing these plugins that Gregory started talking about earlier. With the new version of our Create Nodes API, which is part of our graph creation, we can now provide like more integrated plugins for you to add into your NX workspace, much like installing something into like VS Code, right? Like I have all these extensions. One of them allows me to read Vue. One of them allows me to like run Java, Dino, all those things. But like I don't have to write anything to my workspace. Traditionally, if you wanted to get kind of like the real integrated experience of Cypress into NX, you would have to write package like project.json files and have a bunch of config in there, a lot of which we can actually deduce for you. So that's what this plugin is going to do. This is not available yet. This is just me working locally, but it's part of a whole plan to kind of go more of a deduced fashion of creating your targets. Much like you can deduce like running tests in your IDE. So what this plugin does, and we're going to provide more kind of exposure about what we're actually doing behind the scenes here, is it looks for any Cypress config.ts files that you already have in your repo, right? So like this is the Cypress real world application. For those that don't know, like it's just a repo that the Cypress team put together to demonstrate how you can set up Cypress. And like it did not have NX before. I initialized NX, and the git diff is actually, I think, like 4 files that we added. But this allows you to actually see how you can run your Cypress tests with NX, right? So this is a full-fledged Cypress executor driven like execution of Cypress. It has caching enabled, it has inputs and its outputs, like all of that configured with the like 3 lines that you'll see in your NX.json. And this will be repeated for Jest, Vite, Storybook, like all of those, so that you can take a repo just like this and say, okay, well, this uses Cypress, this uses Vite, and all of that stuff will just be set up for you with a few lines of nx.json. So we hope this will make the configuration a lot smaller for new repos. That's all I'm going to say for now. There's more coming in that vein. So yeah, I'll just leave you to imagine everything that you've ever wanted.
I feel like we finally came to that thing which already kind of kickstarted last year, right? That zero config or negative configuration. How did Victor call it? Like negative configs or something like that?
Yeah.
So really kind of reduce the burden of repetitive things. And we've seen it come up quite a lot also in the community, that people kind of wrote their own plugins to kind of generalize some of the configuration that they had to replicate throughout their repos. And so this is kind of like a follow-up on that. And I'm pretty excited about it because it will also blur, like this is just the first version, right? And so going forward, it will also start blurring some of the lines between, hey, I have my PM-based, package-based workspace, and you have an NX plugin. So once we can reduce some of those configs, they could even start kind of merge more together, where you can just add an NX plugin into an existing package-based monorepo or something. So cool stuff coming up, definitely, on that end. Awesome. We're already 5 minutes over, so I don't want to like waste everyone's time too much. There's tons of further things that we had landed in this release. As mentioned again, like I will again share it here in our chat. We have the release blog post, which has all the details, so you can follow up there. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Because one thing that is coming up soon as well, which a couple people have been asking us, there was actually a question also in the chat, which I cannot find right now, but it was going in the direction of NX release. Here it is. So NX release is working. We're using it on our own GitHub repo, on the own NX repo. We're still have a couple of things, so some rough edges where we might need to change the API. So that's why we're not pushing it right now to everyone. I mean, you can already start using it as we do on the NX repo, but be aware that it's not super stable just yet. But there's a couple of cool things coming up. James is actually working on it and pushing it forward. So we will have support for release groups. Is already something that James demoed, and you can find that also on our blog post about the whole NX Conf summary, where he gave a talk, an outlook and demo of what NX release is about. So this grouped releases will be there. Conventional commit support is already kind of working. I think I approved the PR today morning about a couple of things. It will also have soon independent versioning of projects, so not just like same versioning of all the projects as we do, for instance, for NX, but like sometimes you have requirements. We want to have independent versions. So all those features that you would kind of expect. And in the future, it will even go beyond potentially libraries. So we have even, but that's kind of more far down the road, thoughts about Docker deployment. We need to kind of push the excitement. There's so much stuff coming. I'm super excited about it. I just talked to James today morning. I was like, whoa, that's kind of mind-blowing. So someone brought up Docker container deployment in the chat. That might be something you can actually do with NX release at some point. But yeah, to close up, follow on our channels because that's where we will push out those things and the coming minor releases that are coming up in the next couple of months. And yeah, stay tuned for some more awesome stuff. That's it. Thanks everyone for joining.
See you, everyone.
Bye.